Okay.
You ever want to address me, address the audience, what have you, feel absolutely free.
Okay.
I'm the one editing this thing anyway, so I'll be able to go, this is where he addressed the audience. Cut to camera 3. So
there it is.
Yeah, exactly. So you're never bogged down by
Cool.
anything particular.
Peas and carrots.
Peas and carrots. Peas and carrots.
I forgot how cool the Witherstorm stuff looked.
I mean, well, they did a really good job in creating a character that is blocky, but is the animation is very fluid.
Yeah, and just it ends up being really scary. Like I remember that was sort of a challenge that we had in the early days. Where we were like, how are we going to make a convincingly scary monster out of blocks?
Yeah.
And then it was our concept artist Derek Stratton did the first like full illustration of the Witherstorm, and it was just terrifying looking. And we were like, well, that's our monster. And
now, you were mentioning montages though.
Mm-hmm.
Like, was there any particular movie or whatever that always kind of stuck out for you for when it came to montage?
I mean, the Karate Kid training montage is kind of the classic.
Gotcha.
And
for me, it was always Rocky.
oh man, yeah,
Their montages.
that's another amazing one. Yeah, no, and it is. I think it is a funny example. Oh God.
Oh, come on! I dodged you. Says like every single gamer in one of our games. Come on.
Yeah, and so this was a this was a sequence that we sort of knew from the earliest days of episode 2. We knew wherever we were gonna go, the Witherstorm was gonna show up there to tear the place up and kind of suck up all the suck up the environment.
Yeah.
And so that was some of the earliest concept art we had was the Witherstorm tearing up either Redstonia or Boomtown. It was only later that we realized we were like, how does the Witherstorm know where you are?
Yeah.
Which weirdly is then what led to the idea that it was tracking the gauntlet. And so it was a funny example of like, kind of a cool concept, tracking the gauntlet coming out of like, oh, wait a second, how does the Witherstorm know where you are? And there's a surprising amount of that happens.
So a question I always like to ask whenever we have any writers, designers on the show is what kind of stands out of your mind? Because as we're writing and designing these episodes, there's always some things that kind of get left behind, on the floor, as it were, of like, okay, we took it down this route, we saw it, we tested it, didn't like it, cut it, moved it to something differently. What, if you can remember in this episode...
From this episode?
Yeah, that you guys kind of left on the cutting room floor.
Oh, well, here's our dreamboat Lucas, voiced by Scott Porter. And I think from this episode, things that are... I think what is tough. I think it's great that we did the decision to have you only go to Boomtown or Redstonia, but I think it is hard because we had a lot of really charming content from Axel being in Redstonia or Olivia being in Boomtown because they had a lot of examples of the two of them. The two of them were always sort of butting heads, but they were always friends deep down, and it was a great way of showing like Axel would learn why Olivia was so into Redstone, and Olivia would learn a little bit more about why Axel was so into mayhem and blowing things up.
Gotcha.
And you kind of get to see the two of them learning about that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the thing that from this episode that I probably missed the most is getting to see a little bit of the like, I'm a fish out of water and in the other person's place. I think we still managed to get a little bit of it in, but there was definitely a lot of really charming stuff written for both of them that I'm sad didn't quite make the final cut.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, as I've mentioned before in other episodes, we'll play through, we'll have like a first pass kind of the script, and our cinematic art team will kind of put everything in a very kind of blocked out form. We'll be able to play it through, see what works, what doesn't story-wise. And that's typically kind of where we start to get an area of where things do get cut or added, depending on whatever we feel like the story is needing.
Yeah.
And but it's always interesting that typically we do have a few things that get kind of cut on the showroom floor.
Well, I think what's interesting is what we found was with episodes 2 and 3, we started running into, episode 2 was about like, okay, we need to get the band together. Oh no, the Witherstorm is making it more complicated.
Yeah.
And then episode 3 was kind of the same thing again. And so one of the big things we ran into was trying to figure out how do we make those feel as different as possible from each other. And we're getting into actually one of my favorite dynamics in this first story arc is Eligard and Magnus together is such a fun duo. Because because the voice acting is great because we got Gray as Eligard and it's Corey Feldman as Magnus.
Yeah.
And Magnus is just so much fun to write because he's a little bit shorter than everybody else, which is one of my favorite little details because he's just this big pompous jerk, and he's convinced that he's the greatest thing ever. Just the two of them were always so like kind of spiteful of each other, and they're always like really butting heads. But like it's fun. It was also fun to do that, but also imply that clearly they had a history of. They have a lot of great history together too, and it's one of the thing that always makes me think of is there's that song there's a thin line between love and hate.
Yeah.
And I think that was always Eligard and Magnus for me, was kind of showing these two like they could not stand each other, but at the same time they loved not standing each other. And so they were a lot of fun to write, and I think. Magnus probably of all the characters from season 1 who's not in the story so much anymore in season 2, he's probably one of the characters that I miss writing the most just because he was so insane and bombastic. Oh, and so this was a conversation that got written pretty last minute because this was after we had made the decision
that you weren't going to go
to Boomtown. This is where we have Axel saying that he did all the things in Boomtown that you would have done if you had gone there. And so now Axel is king of Boomtown. Just like if Jessie had gone there, then she would be king of Boomtown.
Gotcha. He, she.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's always king. Magnus is very firm about that. He's like, I don't care if you're a girl, you're still king.
It's not like you can still be a bro.
Even if you're a girl, yeah.
Even if
or
you're
a dude.
Yeah, exactly.
That works too.
What's up, glasses face?
Not much, hat lady.
So this scene got a lot of churn on it, and you talk about like scenes that had a lot of land on the cutting room floor. This was a perfect example because this one, as that first 20-minute chunk on both sides kept changing, this had to keep changing to adjust.
Yeah, this had to keep on changing.
Exactly.
So it could stitch those things together.
And so this then had that moment of like, well, how do we make sure that it feels good? That now we're gonna head to get the next member of the gang without making it feel too samey.
Yeah.
And so this is where we have this sort of moment where they end up kind of bonding again over the fact that they don't really believe that Jessie and that Jessie and friends is going to be able to do what they're claiming they can do. And so it led to this is sort of one of the first examples of kind of a Jessie motivating speech, which is sort of something that's become almost a little bit of a cliche in Minecraft story mode at this point. Jessie climbs up on a block and makes a speech to motivate people.
You gotta have that Patton moment,
Exactly.
Or Braveheart.
And
you gotta end.
Exactly. And this is and this is one of the first examples of that. And and so this scene, this scene's fun because it's where we start to get some of the bigger personalities together. And
well, it is pretty crazy how many actors we have in an IP that when we first got like created, that even the fans were asking the same questions we were. Is like, wait a second, how are we gonna do a story from Minecraft? And so it is pretty kind of cool to see like how many talented voice actors, the awesome story, everything we were able to craft from something that is pretty much a blank slate.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite things about working on this series is we've lucked out time and time again with the caliber of our voice actors.
Yeah.
Oh, and then here's the Formidabomb, which is
the F-bomb.
It's maybe, this all spawned out of this idea that dropping the F-bomb could destroy anything. And it's one of the examples of, it's a joke that I personally go back and forth on because I'm like, is it too tasteless or is it right?
No, I think it's that perfect ride the line kind of thing. And I mean, come on, if you look at it like anything that's also made for kids, typically there is a few adult jokes sprinkled in. Yeah. I point towards Shrek as a good example.
That's a great example.
They do a good job.
Well, and for me, it's sort of the audience I always like to imagine in my head playing this game is like a kid sitting with their parents to play through something together.
Yeah.
And so I think getting in those jokes and it's funny. I saw because we just launched on the Switch a couple weeks ago, and so there have been a lot of these new reviews coming out for the first season, which has been funny to see. A lot of people revisiting the first season. And one of the things I saw called out is people being like, the references in this game are so all over the place and feel like they're going to go over kids' heads. And that is for kind of the more parental set.
Well, because I mean, I've talked to a lot of gamers and kids and parents and whatnot. And it definitely seems like this is one of our titles where families will sit down and play all the time. And it's pretty cool to hear, especially with our crowd play and whatnot that people can use.
Totally.
That in season 2, I've heard from a lot of families that they'll sit down and they'll do crowd play on the couch with their kids.
That's awesome.
While playing season 2 and whatnot.
Yeah,
so.
and it's funny. That's another one of the reasons that we wanted to have these characters that all sort of represented the different ways of playing Minecraft, because it was that idea that letting a kid sit down with their parent and then point to a character and say, "That's why I like playing Minecraft." I like playing Minecraft because, like Eligard, like Olivia, I like building things, or they're like Axel and Magnus, I like blowing things up, and I think it's cool to kind of give kids a little bit of that Rosetta Stone for explaining Minecraft to parents.
Yeah.
And then it also just means it gives us a cast, kind of a lot of very different characters.
All cool.
Oh, Lucas. So Lucas is a hilarious example where he went really back and forth. In the very, very first version, he was kind of a wimpy theater kid.
Wasn't he a bit more of a jerk?
Well, so that was the second version. So he went from being a wimpy theater kid, and then he swung to being a jerk, and then the final version got a leather jacket and a cool haircut and blended the two. And so what's hilarious is he's a guy who's a jerk ever so occasionally, but he also steals a lot of the sensitive lines. And so it created this crazy hybrid where I think it's why he's become so appealing to people, because also Scott Porter having a dreamy voice.
Yes.
But just landing in this, he landed in this spot where he's both, he's a jerk, but he's also sensitive.
He's a sensey jerk.
Exactly, and he's an example of a character who through that first episode changed so much, because it was him and his group of friends who were originally putting on a play, and so they were kind of more the theater kids, and it never, it was not the most exciting way to open the game.
Yeah.
Which is how we end up swinging from there.
Oh.
And then here's where this is where we have the first introduction of Soren, who was the person who was one of the kind of big members of the original Order of the Stone. Yeah. And the other members of the Order were they don't know if he's dead, he's just been kind of off on his own for ages. Yeah. And so this is the first reveal that he is in fact still alive, and hinting at that we're going to be encountering him.
This definitely feels very Goonies in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it definitely had that, where it was you're having our characters who, even though they're not kids, kind of occupy more of that kid role, and kind of seeing the drama of sort of your elders, and then sort of seeing how you fit into it, and seeing that all that drama means I'm gonna have to step up and do this myself.
And I would recommend to anybody who's watching that you've never seen the Goonies, or maybe never even heard of Goonies, which I don't know would blow both of our minds. But I know you're out there. Watch Goonies. It is an awesome movie. It has a lot of what I think really makes up a lot of the 80s and 90s of what brought us to where we're at.
Well, I think it's a really interesting example of it was before PG-13 started being filled with all the big summer blockbusters, and it's when a lot of the biggest movies were still PG. Yeah. And so that's where the first Indiana Jones lived, and the Goonies, and Back to the Future, and a lot of these movies that at the time weren't being segmented so much, and just kind of being made for everyone. So they were just kind of these big, crazy, fun adventure romps full of great characters. Yeah. And it was one of these things too where they'd get these great actors in it. I think that's what's crazy about the Goonies is it's got Josh Brolin, it's got Sean Astin, that Martha Plimpton who's in here. Sean Astin's in episode 5.
I know we have
Corey
a lot
Feldman.
of Goonie fans that work in this office, including Job Stoffer.
He's a very big Goonies fan.
I remember, what was it, the 25th or 30th year anniversary, whatever we're here to this
Whichever
point.
one just happened.
Whatever just happened anniversary-wise, I know him, and then Melissa Hutchison, who is the voice of Clementine, Walking Dead. They all went.
Some big anniversary screening.
They went
right?
to the anniversary. Well, it was actually in the beach town. They went up to Oregon.
Oh, that's right. I saw those pictures.
Yeah, and to see that, it was pretty awesome to see. They were such huge fans. They made the trek up to Oregon.
To see the beach where it all got filmed.
Yeah, to see for the anniversary, which is pretty cool. Which is funny because I was born in Seaside, Oregon, which was only a few towns over from, I forget the name of the beach of where it was all filmed.
That's awesome.
He's a jerk, but he's our jerk.
It was just kind of Axel in a nutshell. One of these, I think, is important. You know, one of those.